Hey, what's going on, guys? Realm Gaming here. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention some of my socials in the description of the video. If you want to support the channel, please check those out. If you want to support the channel in other ways, please consider just dropping a like or a nice comment somewhere in the video. It really helps the algorithm push our content out there to a broader audience. With that being said, hope you guys enjoy the episode. Hey, what's going on, guys? Realm Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Preservation Evoker for Mythic Plus Season 1 of The War Within. This guide has nothing to do with raiding or PvP, anything like that. I personally only play Mythic Plus, so that's what we're going to stick to on this video. And this is going to be mainly a beginner's guide video. I'm going to title it as such, and the whole idea of this video is not to go over like any sort of insane preservation combos. Anything like really advanced tips are not going to be in this guide. This is mainly going to be how to play the spec, how to wrap your head around some of the spells, the abilities. To be honest with you, Preservation Evoker was even difficult for me to learn. As somebody who's been playing WoW since Burning Crusade, I have spent many weeks trying to learn some of the ins and outs of the specialization, and it's still not even super easy to me. And that's not even getting into any of the advanced stuff. It's just some of the basic stuff. It kind of works on like a combo system where you're supposed to use specific spells in very specific orders. So this isn't going to be one of those healing specializations where you could just kind of run around and get through keys just by spamming like a healing surge with a couple riptides or anything like that. You really have to understand some of the core components of your spells. So that's what this guide is going to be aimed towards, is beginner players just trying to learn preservation for the first time. I'm going to go over some basic combos, how spells sort of synergize with one another. I'll take a look at talent, stuff like that as well. So let's first talk about hero talent. So since this is a beginner's guide, we're just going to go over the Chronowarden. We're not going to go over Flame Shaper. It seems almost unanimously people are picking Chronowarden over Flame Shaper. I'm not saying Flame Shaper is bad. I do believe it is viable, but most people, I think Growl has also picked Chronowarden. I think Automatic Jack has also picked Chronowarden. Seems like most people are kind of leading towards this sort of play style. So let's take a quick look at the tree. So we have Chrono Flames, and what this is going to do is this is going to replace our Living Flame. So our Living Flame is like our single target damage or heal ability, and it actually gets transformed into something called Chrono Flame. So basically what this is going to do is this is going to repeat 15% of the damage or heal that you deal to a specific target as Arcane up to a specific cap. Now at the very bottom, we also have After Image, and After Image is very strong because empowered spells are going to send up to 3 Chrono Flames to your targets, so you can get a lot of passive damage and healing from this. So we'll kind of talk a little bit later about what empowered spells are when we get to that section, but that's kind of how After Image works. And then down here in the middle of the tree, it's kind of like a weird chain of events. So each node kind of refers to the next node, and the top node refers to your tip to scales. So really all this down here in the middle kind of goes back to your tip to scales, but we'll kind of read them out. So tip to scales overloads your temporal energy, increasing your haste, movement speed, and cooldown recovery rate by 30%. So when we press our tip to scales button, this is basically going to give us like a mini lust essentially. So if you're not familiar with what tip to scales is, basically this is going to make our next empowered spell cast instantly at maximum empower level. So spells like our Spiritbloom and Dream Breath can be cast at maximum effectiveness and instant cast. So Temporal Burst again kind of gives us that mini lust effect. Then we also have Threads of Fate right below it. So casting an empowered spell during Temporal Burst again being the node right above it, causes a nearby ally to gain a Thread of Fate for 10 seconds, granting them a chance to echo their damage or healing spells, dealing 15% of that amount again. So this spell is going to turn our Temporal Burst up here into like a mini lust for another ally. So kind of like almost a watered down effect of Temporal Burst for an ally. Then down here at the bottom, we have Instability Matrix. So basically each time that we cast an empowered spell, it's going to be taking 6 seconds off that specific spell's cooldown. Then on the top right here, we have Reverberation. Spiritbloom heals for a additional 30% over 8 seconds. And then right below that, we have Primacy here. So for each hot effect from this above node that goes on an ally, we gain 3% haste up to 9%. So you want to make sure that when you do cast your Spiritbloom, that you're getting it to at least 1, 2, 3 stacks. Golden Opportunity, which just gives us a chance to make our echo twice as effective as normal. We have Warp in the top left, which basically turns our hover into like a mage blink effect, which is really cool. And then directly below that, we have Temporality. So Warp reduces the damage taken by 20%, starting high, reducing over 3 seconds. So we can actually use our hover through Warp to get a little bit of damage mitigation. Then finally, in the bottom left, we have Time Convergence. So non-defensive abilities with a 45-second or longer cooldown grant 5% intellect for 15 seconds. So an example of this would be something maybe like our Emerald Communion spell. If you're not familiar with what that spell is, it's right over here on the right. This is basically a really strong single target heal, and then it also takes overhealing and kind of disperses that out on our allies. We'll talk more about this later. But in a nutshell, that is pretty much the Chronowarden tree. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk a little bit about stat priority. So there's two different ways that you can kind of break out stat priority. You can do like a healing focus or a DPS focus. I'm going to be more geared towards the healing focus in this guide because, you know, most people are trying to keep up with healing. We're learning a new spec for the first time, so we're not going to be focused quite as much on DPS, but I will give the DPS stat priority really quick. So if you are DPS focused, you'll be going item level, of course, over everything, into haste, into critical strike, which equals versatility, and then finally mastery at the bottom. Then if you are going for a more healing focused build, you're going to be going item level over everything. Then we're going to be going into crit and mastery. And we don't see that too much typically in healers having super high mastery. So that's kind of cool to see. And then we will also be going into haste and versatility as our 3 and 4 options. So Preservation Evoker is going to be a very bursty specialization, which is why we focus on so much critical strike and mastery. Let's talk about our mastery really quick, what it even is. So Mastery Lifebinder, healing done to allies is increased by 30.5% while their health percentage is lower than your own. So this means we're always going to want to prioritize getting our health up. And, you know, of course, unless you think somebody's about to die, but the more health that we have than our allies, the more healing that we do. So Mastery is going to be very strong for us. And then Critical Strike is going to be really strong because of a spell called Reversion. So we'll talk about Reversion a little bit later in the video if you're not familiar with it. But if we look at the second paragraph here, when Reversion critically heals, its duration is extended by 2 seconds up to a maximum of 12 seconds. So Reversion is a spell that we're going to be using a whole bunch, and we always want to keep Reversion up on as many targets as possible. So getting critical heals from this is just going to extend that duration, leading to more overall healing. And the reason that Reversion is such a strong spell is going to be to Golden Hour, so instantly heals the target for 15% of the damage taken in the last 5 seconds. And then at the very bottom, we also have a grace period. Your healing is increased by 10% on targets with your Reversion. And then if we just type in Reversion here to our bar, you can just see all the different spells that synergize with it. So it's just a very strong spell in our kit, and you want to be using it very often. So after that, we're going to focus on versatility, and versatility is going to be pretty strong, especially in Mythic plus dungeons, where you're trying to basically stay alive. This is just a stat stick to keep yourself alive for the most part, and it gives, you know, flat damage, flat healing, so that's all really nice as well. But the main reason you'd be stacking some versatility is if you're having issues staying alive during like big burst phases in a dungeon. Then finally, haste will be probably last on our list, and I don't think haste is necessarily bad to have, but Preservation Evoker just doesn't scale quite as well with it. We're going to be focused more on those big burst cast rather than a lot of quick successive casts. All right, now let's just kind of talk about some of our base spells and what Preservation Evoker even is. So in terms of like resources, we have mana. We also have essence charges. So you can use these essence charges on specific spells. One of them would be like Disintegrate, but the main thing that you're going to be using your essence on is your Echo. So let's kind of talk about the essence system really quick. What Echo even is. So Echo is going to cost 2 essence, 33,000 mana, and this is basically going to duplicate one of your healing spells. So a lot of your spread AoE healing is actually going to be coming from Echo. So these are charges that you have to be kind of careful with, because if you use them on like specific spells that aren't super strong, you're going to be wasting essence, you're going to be wasting Echo charges, and you're going to be just getting less throughput overall. So let's just look at this at its most basic level. We can select a training dummy here. We can echo it. And then I'm going to press Chrono Flames, which is our single target heal. It's going to heal me. And you can see it also healed our ally over there. Now you also see I got something that popped up on my screen here, and this is called Essence Burst. So Essence Burst is going to be in our talent tree. Living Flame has a 20% chance and Reversion has a 15% chance to make your next Essence ability free, stacks to 2 times. So anytime you see that little icon pop up kind of around your character, just know you should probably be spending it on Echo. You can also spend it on Disintegrate. So I'll just kind of show you what Disintegrate looks like really quick. We don't have a charge, so Disintegrate is going to cost some essence here for us. But just to show you, it's basically this beam that you send out, and it does ticking damage. Now, through a talent called Energy Loop here, this is what I personally like to run. You can also flex this talent into Time of Need if you want, which is basically a way to save an ally who falls low in health. You get like a burst of healing. So this is a flex talent, but Energy Loop is going to make our Disintegrate regenerate mana. So it'll deal 35% more damage and also regenerate 126k mana over its duration. So if you are, for whatever reason, running into mana issues, you can run Energy Loop. If not, then you can just go into Time of Need here. All right, so for the essence-based stuff, that's pretty much it, at least for now. Let's stop there and let's kind of go into empowered spells. So your main empowered spells, you got 3 of them. You have Spiritbloom, you have Dream Breath, and then you also have Fire Breath. So the way that these empowered spells work is the more that you charge them up, they don't actually do more healing or damage, but they do more burst healing or damage. So if I do a full stack of Dream Breath, that's going to be all the healing into one big burst, and it's going to be a smaller hot. But if I do 1 stack of Dream Burst or 2, like I just did there, it's going to be a stronger heal over time effect, but less burst healing. So typically, we are using Dream Breath at 1 stack to get that really strong heal over time effect. And then we can also use Fire Breath at 1 stack as well. And we actually get some healing through our Fire Breath through Life Giver's Flame. So you can kind of treat it as a mini heal as well. But for the most part, you're just using Fire Breath for some damage over time effects. Now, we do also have some synergy, kind of like we discussed in our hero talents section with After Image. So Empower spells are going to send up to 3 Chrono Flames to your targets. So if you hit allies with your empowered spells, you get Chrono Flames as healing. If you hit enemies with your empowered spells, then you get Chrono Flames as damage. So we have Fire Breath that you can use at typically 1 stack. We have Dream Breath that you can typically do at, I say 1 stack, 1 charge. And then we also have Spiritbloom that we want to use at 3 or higher charges. And the reason for that is due to our primacy here. So from each heal over time effect from Spiritbloom, we gain 3 haste up to 9%. And then Reverberations is what's going to put on that heal over time effect. Okay, so that's going to be your core empowered spells. Let's go ahead and talk about some of this other stuff over here. We already talked about Echo, so I'm not going to talk about that. We also talked about Living Flame and Chrono Flame. So we got 2 more spells that we need to talk about here. The first one is going to be, let's do Temporal Anomaly. And I actually lied, we do have 3 more spells that we need to talk about. So let's first talk about Temporal Anomaly. So what this does is this will send out this sort of orb, and it's going to put an echo on all your allies that it hits. Now, this is a lesser effect echo. This is not as strong as your main echo ability, but it is still pretty strong overall since it's hitting 5 different targets. So you can use that echo for a whole bunch of group AoE healing. So when you do send out your Temporal Anomaly, you want to make sure that you're hitting as many allies in its path as you possibly can. Then we also have Reversion here that we kind of talked about earlier. And this is the reason that we are stacking so much Critical Strike, is because when this does critical, we do get that extended duration, and we have so many spells that do synergize with Reversion. So what I've personally done is I've put my Temporal Anomaly, and we'll talk about this in the Weekar macro section, but I put my Temporal Anomaly and my Reversion all into one sort of macro here, because while Temporal Anomaly is on cooldown, I might as well have something else to cast in that hotkey. So with Reversion, we heal up 15% of the damage that they've taken within the last 5 seconds. We also get a heal over time effect from it. And then through our grace period, we also get 10% additional healing on all targets with Reversion. So we want to keep Reversion up on as many targets as we can. Okay, so that's sort of our base healing spells. Let's talk about sort of our healing rotation. It's not really a rotation, to be honest, but how to use some of these spells together. So like we just said, we always want to keep our Temporal Anomaly on cooldown, and we also want to make sure that our Reversion is always on cooldown. Again, I put it into a macro here. It's all in one button. From here, we want to be spreading out echoes on our allies. So I could put an echo on myself. I could also put an echo on an ally. Then once our echoes are up, then we can use some of our more powerful single target healing to reverberate all that healing out to our echo targets. So typically what you want to do is you want to echo a couple of allies, and then you want to use a spell called Verdant Embrace. And I apologize, I forgot to talk about this, so let's go over Verdant Embrace. So Verdant Embrace is a big single target heal, and you will fly to an ally, and basically you'll do a big burst of healing. Now, the healing from Verdant Embrace it's pretty decent. However, the main thing about Verdant Embrace is all the buffs that you get out of it. So let's kind of talk about that now. So we have two main spells that we're tracking with our Verdant Embrace. So the first one's going to be Call of Ysera here. Verdant Embrace increases the healing of your next Dream Breath by 40% or your next Living Flame by 100%. So typically, we're going to be pairing this with our Dream Breath. So what we can do is we can Verdant Embrace an ally, and then we can do a 1-stack Dream Breath on top of that, and we just got 40% additional healing with our Dream Breath. So if that Dream Breath hit 5 targets, including yourself, that would be 40% more Dream Breath healing that you're getting on all of those targets. So it's a lot of additional healing. So this is kind of where the combo aspect starts to come in with Preservation Evoker. You want to be using your spells in specific orders, and it takes a little bit of getting used to properly play it, in my opinion. So not only does Verdant Embrace buff our next Dream Breath, we also have a spell called Lifebind. So Verdant Embrace temporarily bonds your life with an ally, causing your healing on either partner to heal the other for 40% of the amount. So what you can actually do is you can echo 2 or 3 different party members, and then you can Verdant Embrace on top of that, and you can actually apply Lifebind to multiple allies at once. So kind of a trick that you can do is apply as many Lifebinds out as possible, and then go into a big Emerald Communion, which does really strong single target healing to yourself, and 40% of that Emerald Communion healing to yourself will then be transferred to your allies with Lifebind on them. So to show you what that looks like, I can Verdant Embrace this target. You see as Lifebind, I can put that into a big Emerald Communion, and now he's getting 40% of my Emerald Communion healing, which is very, very strong. Now you could also pair that with something like a Temporal Anomaly, and you can get echoes on everybody, then Verdant Embrace a target, and then go into that big Emerald Communion. So again, kind of getting into the combos and whatnot, but that's sort of how Lifebinder works, just kind of FYI. Then the last thing I'm going to talk about here in terms of just our base healing rotation is Life Spark. So Reversion healing has a chance to cause your next Living Flame to cast instantly, deal 50% increased healing or damage, stacks up to 2 charges. So this is a proc actually. So kind of take a look at this really quick. We'll Reversion myself and this target here. And let's see if we can get a proc of our Life Spark. Okay, so we ended up getting a proc. You can kind of see the red bar going across the screen. This means our Chrono Flames will now be instant cast. All right, now let's kind of talk about the cookie cutter sort of rotation. I mean, there is no rotation with Preservation Evoker, but if I were to have to put it into one, it would probably be something like this. So we would Temporal Anomaly. We'd get a couple reversions out, one on myself, potentially one on the tank, whoever's taking damage. Then from here, you can use your Echo either on Chrono Flames or Verdant Embrace. So I can Echo the target dummy, I can Echo myself, and I can use Chrono Flames as sort of like a cleave AoE healing. And then I can also use Echo with Verdant Embrace as well. So I can use Verdant Embrace sort of like as a cleave AoE healing. So you're wanting to pair your Echoes with Chrono Flames and Verdant Embrace, those big single target healing spells, where you can kind of get some cleave healing out. So taking another look at this, right? Temporal Anomaly, we can Reversions, we can throw out an Echo on the target dummy, and Echo on myself. We can Verdant Embrace to get our Lifebind, and then we got some spread healing through Echoes there. Now I can Echo the training dummy, and then I can Chrono Flame myself, and we got healing between these 2 targets as well through our Chrono Flames. I would say the biggest part of this is make sure that you're using your Echoes. Do not overcap on Essence. Make sure you're spreading it out to 2 to 3 different targets, and then you're pairing those Echoes again with a very big single target heal. That is very core to Preservation Evoker, so that's kind of why I'm hitting it so many times here. But that is what I just kind of talked about in these 3 or 4 spells is going to be the biggest. It's probably going to have the biggest impact on your healing throughput. So that's going to be kind of how you spend your Echo, Temporal Anomaly, and your Reversions. Let's talk about the empowered spells again. So you can Spiritbloom again at 3 charges due to hero talents. We get the haste buff here. And excuse me, I think I said 3 charges earlier, or I showed the wrong example. I think you want to stack it to this charge here. I guess that's the 4th charge to get 3 stacks of your primacy. So I apologize if I got that wrong earlier. So charge up that 4th bar to get max stacks of haste through hero talents. Then we will want to Dream Breath, but we want to remember that we want to Verdant Embrace before we Dream Breath so that we can get that Call of Ysera buff. We can get that 40% increased on our heal over time effect. And this is another thing that I screwed up on earlier in the guide. We actually want to stack our Fire Breath to max charges due to Leaping Flames. So Fire Breath causes your next Living Flame to strike 1 additional target per Empower level. I apologize. I did forget that earlier in the guide. So what we can do kind of as a combo is we can Fire Breath to max charges, and then we can kind of follow that up with a Chrono Flame, and we get a whole bunch of extra bolts. I said bolts, but Living Flames that kind of go out. And those Living Flames can either damage or heal. So again, just more passive healing. All right, now let's talk about some of our cooldowns. So Preservation Evoker has really strong cooldowns actually compared to, like, it's crazy to come on a Preservation Evoker and look at the cooldowns on it compared to something like a Restoration Shaman. I mean, you could just absolutely just completely cheese certain mechanics with some of these crazy cooldowns. Now, some of them are on a pretty long cooldown, but you just have so many of them. And you can really bail yourself and your party out by using these effectively. First one we have is Renewing Blaze, 1 minute cooldown. The flames of life surround you for 8 seconds. While this effective is active, 100% of damage you take is healed back over 8 seconds. So this is a personal that you can use on yourself. It's on a 1 minute cooldown, and this makes it really difficult to die. All the damage that you take is then healed back. So if you're not getting one shot, for the most part, Renewing Blaze is going to be able to keep you up through any sort of high damage phase. So just absolutely broken ability there. We also have Tip the Scales that we talked about earlier. So bring that up really quick. So Tip the Scales on a 2 minute cooldown, compress time and make your next empowered spell cast instantly at its maximum empower level. So we kind of talked about this within the hero talents section. We have the middle section of the tree kind of focuses around Tip the Scales, turns it into a mini lust for us. And I have this in a macro because I like to use it with Spiritbloom. Spiritbloom is going to be our main sort of AoE heal. So what I have is Tip the Scales, I press it, then it automatically changes to Spiritbloom here, and then I press it again, all in the same hotkey, and it does a big burst of AoE healing. So that's kind of like a fail safe so I don't accidentally screw up the combo. We also have Zephyr here on a 2 minute cooldown. So conjure an updraft to lift you and the 4 nearest allies up within 20 yards into the air, reducing damage taken from AoE attacks by 20% and increasing movement speed by 30% for 8 seconds. So going to be great to use on a movement phase where your whole party has to move around some sort of mechanic. And this is actually really good to reduce damage taken as well. So any sort of AoE attacks, ground effects that might affect your entire party, you get damage reduction from this as well. On a 2 minute cooldown, so you can be pretty aggressive with it. Now, probably for I don't want to say it's the most broken ability in our kit, but if it's not number 1, it's number 2. We have Rewind here, 4 minute cooldown, rewinds 33% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds by allies, then 40 yards, always heals for at least 90,000. I believe that number scales. Healing is increased by 100% when not in a raid. So this is going to be the button that if your party is sitting at 30% health, a big mechanic just went out, you can press this and it will rewind all that damage taken and just do almost like a big heal to your party. So this is really strong because it's a percentage value. So it doesn't matter, how high of a key that you go up, it will stay as a percentage value, and it doesn't matter if 1 billion damage goes out, this is going to heal for 33% of 1 billion damage that went out. Little bit of an over exaggeration there, but you get the point. Then we also have our Emerald Communion here, which is a very strong single target heal. And again, we can throw out a bunch of echoes before this into a Verdant Embrace for that life bind, and then we can Emerald Communion ourselves to disperse 40% of this healing to our allies. So depending on how you use this, this can be a very strong ability. Then we also have Stasis. So Stasis is kind of a weird one to get used to. This is on a 1.5 minute cooldown, and what you can do is you can store 3 helpful spells that will be duplicated once you press this button again. So there's all sorts of crazy combos that you can do with Stasis, but the one that I'm going to talk about is, I believe they call it the green combo. And basically what you can do is Stasis into a Temporal Anomaly, into a rank 1 Dream Breath, into a rank 4 Spiritbloom. So to show you what this looks like, basically we can Stasis, we can Temporal Anomaly here into a rank 1 Dream Breath, and then we'll just do a max rank Spiritbloom. And then those 3 spells are stored into our Stasis here, and then we can cast Stasis again, and all the spells will be duplicated. So this can do a ton of burst damage. It's kind of hard to use though. You really have to know the boss or the mechanic that's about to come out to be able to utilize it properly, because it does require some setup. So sure, it's on a low cooldown, but you do have to prepare yourself to use it properly. We also have Time Dilation here on a 1 minute cooldown. Stretch time around an ally for the next 10 seconds, causing 50% of the damage it would take to instead be dealt over 10.5 seconds. So if there's a huge dot, a huge single target dot that's going out on an ally, you can use something like Time Dilation to kind of lengthen that damage out so it's easier to heal through. Now let's kind of just briefly talk about damage rotation. So we've already talked about how we want to charge up our Fire Breath to max stacks due to Leaping Flames here. Then we can kind of follow that up with our Chrono Flames, get a whole bunch of flames that kind of go out and do passive healing and damage. But we also have our Disintegrate, and we have talked about this earlier in the video as well, but we can use this to restore some of our mana. So when we do get a proc here, we could spend that proc on a Disintegrate. So Disintegrate does an okay amount of single target damage. It generates mana as well. And then we do have a big cooldown called Deep Breath here. So Deep Breath, you kind of throw it out like this, and you will fly in a specific path, and it will basically damage all the enemies within your path. It does a pretty significant amount of damage, especially in AoE scenarios, but just be careful with it because you are literally flying across the screen. So there's been many times where I've accidentally flown myself into like a ground mechanic, so just kind of be cautious of that. Now let's kind of talk about like utility and just like other defensives that I might have missed. First utility spell I want to talk about is Hover. And we talked about a lot of the stuff already earlier in the guide, but just to kind of reiterate over it, launch yourself and gain 30% increased movement speed for 6 seconds. So what this will do is through hero talents, this will basically blink us across the map. It kind of bugged out there on the stairs, but it blinks you and teleports you a short distance. So you can really use this to skip over specific ground mechanics. And then through hero talents as well, we also have our temporality here, which warp will reduce the damage taken by 20% for 3 seconds after we cast our hover ability. And if you're not familiar with what warp is, it's this talent here. So I got a blink that also reduces our damage taken. We also have a tail swipe. So tail swipes on a 1.5 minute cooldown, lash out with your tail, knocking enemies within 8 yards into the air. So an AoE kick, very powerful. We also have our wing buffet on a 1.5 minute cooldown. So with a powerful flap of your wings, knock away enemies in front of you, kind of like a druid typhoon. Then finally, we have a pressing roar on a 2 minute cooldown. Let out a bone shaking roar at enemies in a cone in front of you, increasing the duration of CC effects on them by 50% for the next 10 seconds. So you can kind of pair that with some of your group's utility. We also have a lust as well called Fury of the Aspects on a 5 minute cooldown. This is going to increase your party's haste by 30% for 40 seconds. And something I probably should have talked about in the cooldown section, we have Obsidian Scales here, 1.5 minute recharge. So this is kind of like a personal. Reinforce your scales, reducing damage taken by 30%, last 12 seconds, and you get 2 charges of this. So if you're familiar with like Bark Skin on Resto Druid, something like that, something like Astral Shift on a Resto Shaman, this is Preservation Evoker's version of that. And then we also have our Dispels, and I have seen some big brain stuff with your Dispels, so let's kind of talk about it first. We have Cauterizing Flame on a 1 minute cooldown. This will remove all bleed, poison, curse and disease effects, and this will also heal the target if you do remove one of those effects. This is on a 1-minute cooldown, so if you have a bleed, curse, or disease, you'll use Cauterizing Flame. If you have a poison or a magic effect on a target, you can use Naturalize. So you have two different dispels, kind of weird. I have a macro here that will attempt to use Naturalize first to remove the effect, and then if it doesn't, then I have my Cauterizing Flame that I can fall back on if I need to. So that's just kind of a way to put both of the spells into one button. You may not like that at all. That's totally fine. You don't have to use it. And then last thing I think we have here in terms of like utility is our Quell on a 40-second cooldown, and this is going to be our interrupt. So pretty long cooldown on an interrupt, to be honest, but it is better than not having an interrupt at all, so I'm not going to complain. And I actually lied, there's one more thing to talk about, is our party buff. So we have Blessing of the Bronze, and just to read it out, weave the threads of time, reducing the cooldown of a major movement ability for all party and raid members by 50% for 1 hour. Now let's talk about macros really quick. This will be the last few sections when we kind of wrap up the video here. So here we have our Temporal Anomaly macro that we used earlier in the video. So what this will do is it'll cast Temporal Anomaly, and then this will allow us 13 seconds to cast our next 2 reversions. And I kind of like it because while Temporal Anomaly is on cooldown, it'd be nice to kind of free up some additional keybinds and just kind of put the reversions behind the Temporal Anomaly. So you don't have to use it, but just something that I personally use. I also have my Tip the Scales macro, which will make our next empowered ability instant cast and cast at full effect. I use it with Spiritbloom, and this just kind of puts it all into one button. Kind of show you guys again what that looks like. It's on Shift 2. Tip the Scales into my fully powered Spiritbloom. And this is the macro that I use to dispel with, to put both of my dispels into one button. What it'll do is it'll attempt to dispel it with Naturalize. If Naturalize fails to dispel it, we can always fall back on our Cauterizing Flame. And kind of the good thing about this macro is if there's nothing to dispel, they won't go on cooldown. So you can just kind of spam it if you need to and kind of go back and forth between the two spells. If it dispels something, great, then it goes on cooldown. And I'm actually going to change the reset here to 8 seconds. I think that will actually fit a little bit better just in case you do get a Naturalized Dispel. This is going to give you a full 8 seconds to use your Cauterizing Flame. Then after 8 seconds, Naturalize will be back off cooldown, so you could just kind of restart the whole loop again. Then another thing here I want to go over is mouse over macros. So if you're not familiar with what a mouse over macro is, it basically allows you to cast a spell without having to click on a specific target. So I can cast a spell on this training dummy just by hovering my mouse over and not actually selecting it. Show you what that looks like. Just do my Verdant Embrace. I was able to heal that without clicking on it. So that saves us some cognitive overload, less thinking, less clicks. We can heal more efficiently. I would highly recommend to enable mouse over macros. So what you can do is go to options, type in the word mouse over, and then on mouse over cast, you can just select that. Then now all your healing and damage spells become mouse overs, and you don't have to use macros anymore for mouse overs. So really nice to have this option built into the game. And then Preservation Evoker, also just Evoker in general for their empowered spells. I believe press and hold casting is enabled by default, which means you have to hold down the key to get full charges. And then when you release, that's when the spell is cast. I personally like to disable that. That way, all I have to do is press Fire Breath, just tap my key. Now my fingers are off the keyboard and I can press it again. And then that's the cast will kind of complete without me having to hold down and release the key. So yeah, hopefully that made sense. Then in terms of weak auras, guys, I don't have any weak auras for Preservation Evoker. It's a pretty new class. It's pretty up to date. It doesn't really need any weak auras to track anything specifically. And on top of that, there's not a ton of weak auras out there for Preservation Evoker. There could be some really good ones that I'm just not familiar with. So if there are some good ones, please leave those in the comments below and we can add that to our list for future videos. So yeah, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something from it. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I also have some socials below in the description of the video. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one.